When the Civil War began, the North's strategy was made of three major ideas. First, they wanted to block off southern ports. This would cut off supplies coming in from Europe. Then they wanted to control the Mississippi River. This would break the Confederacy into two separate parts. Finally, they wanted to destroy transportation and communication lines throughout the South. The South knew that winning a war against the North would be difficult. They planned on fighting a defensive war. They wanted to make the North fight until they got tired of fighting. They planned to rely on supplies from Europe to keep their economy going during this time. Most of the battles in the Civil War took place in Virginia or along the Mississippi River, but there was some fighting that occurred in South Carolina during the war. The first shots of the war were fired on Fort Sumter. Fort Sumter was a Union military base on a small island in Charleston Harbor. Northern troops attempted to bring supplies to the soldiers who were stationed there. This led to a battle with the Confederates. But the Union Army still maintained a strong presence in the state. Port Royal Sound was near Hilton Head. This area was taken from the Confederate Army and remained in Union control throughout the rest of the war. The Union's main goal in South Carolina was to prevent the import and export of goods through the state's many ports. At first, the Confederates thought this might actually help them. They hoped that when European countries were not able to receive cash crops, like cotton, that maybe they would decide to join the war on the side of the Confederates. This did not happen. European countries just looked for cotton and other cash crops in other parts of the world instead. The northern blockade of southern ports seemed to be an effective strategy. The Confederates tried anything they could to break these blockades. They used ships called blockade runners to break through the Union Navy. These rarely worked. They even tried using new technology to get around the blockades as well. The Hunley was a Confederate submarine that was used during this time. It successfully attacked a Union ship, but it failed to return back to its base after the event. At the time, no one was really sure what exactly happened to the Hunley. It was not until over 100 years later that it was found at the bottom of Charleston Harbor. The northern blockade was devastating for the South. It made it very hard for necessary supplies to reach the Confederate Army. The Union Army kept a strong presence in Charleston. It was a very important location. It was a major port city in the South. During this time, a unit of African American soldiers in the Union Army were sent to fight against the Confederate Army at Fort Wagner. They were called the 54th Massachusetts Regiment. A large number of these African American soldiers were killed during this battle. The group would later be honored for their bravery on the battlefield. Robert Smalls was a 23-year-old slave. He knew a lot about boats. He had spent a great deal of time working near the water. During the war, the Confederates were actually using him as a pilot on some of their ships. One night, he decided to make a daring escape. He loaded his wife and children on his ship, the CSS Planter. He sailed through Charleston Harbor, right past all the Confederate forts. Then he sailed right into the Union blockade. There he surrendered and turned his ship over to the Union Navy. Smalls knew a lot of information about what the Confederates were doing in Charleston. He shared everything he knew with the Union Army. When people heard about his daring escape, Smalls quickly became a hero in northern newspapers. He was even offered a leadership role in the South Carolina militia. After the war, Smalls served in the state government. He helped write a new constitution for the state of South Carolina. He even became one of the first African Americans ever elected to the United States Congress. William Sherman was a Union general. His goal was to cause as much destruction in the South as he could. His soldiers destroyed Confederate lines of transportation and communication. This weakened the morale of the people living in the South. He started in Atlanta, Georgia, but his plan was to work his way all the way to the Atlantic coast. People sometimes refer to this event as Sherman's marched to the sea. He tried to make things as bad as he possibly could for the Southern people. He wanted to convince the people that the Confederate Army needed to surrender. Sherman's army destroyed homes, burned plantations, tore up railroads, and totally destroyed towns. Even government buildings were not safe from Sherman's destruction. In South Carolina, the capital city of Columbia was burned to the ground. He thought South Carolina especially needed to be punished, since it had been the first state to secede from the Union.